Hey everyone, thank you so much for having me here. I'm so glad to be back at React Europe after 2 years. I'm going to talk about design tools, how to build one in React for React. So let me introduce myself. I'm Sanket and I look like that on the internet. I'm a software engineer and CEO at Geeky Ants. I co-created this little library called Native Base and I go by the Twitter handle Sanket Sahu. Let's start. What's a design tool? For me, this was the first design tool, MS Paint. It was called as Paint and Brush. It was very easy to use. Pick a tool from the left panel, start putting your creativity on the canvas. We had a bunch of like very natural uh, options like pencil, brush, paint bucket. And I don't know why, but everybody drew mountains and sceneries with sun peeking through the mountains. And I did that too. And I recently got a hold of a touchscreen PC, and I couldn't stop myself from drawing this. Anyway, let's have a look at modern day design tools. So that's Adobe XD. It's a screen design tool, very modern and clean, very similar to the layout from the past with tools on the left side and the canvas on the right to draw. That's how most of the design tools look like today, right? But I want to ask this question. Can we build design tools using React? Let's see. So Framer uses React. It's a prototyping tool. You can even embed React components in Framer. And then Figma is built using C++ that runs in the browser using WASM. It uses a bit of React for the side panels and on the like not for the main designer piece, but yeah, on the outer side it uses a bit of React. So and the next question I want to ask is like, can these tools code React for us? Because we are actually designing screens there. So wouldn't it be great if these tools can actually code React for us? And that reminds me, I really miss Visual Basic. Visual Basic was it a design tool? Can we say that? I'm not sure. Let's see how it looks like. It used to look similar to design tools with the tools on the left and a canvas and some properties on the right side. Uh, First, you can design the interface. And then the good thing about this was you could code or integrate your, say, API calls or business logic on the UI with the programming language BASIC. Good old days. I really miss how easy it was. And I miss the background too. So, how about Visual Basic for web? Wouldn't it be awesome if we can build web apps or even say cross-platform mobile apps using something like Visual Basic or Visual Basic for React to be precise? And looks like Dan misses it too. Let me quote his tweet from like about 6 months ago. Put Visual Basic in React, you cowards. And yes, that would be a dream come true. So I've tried it. I've tried to build a design tool that generates code. It's not close to what Visual Basic was, but it's a design tool that generates some code. And it's called BuilderX. And here is how it looks like. You can design screens with not only shapes, but elements like input, maps, and more. Uh, and So here, this is an example of like drawing rectangles, input boxes, and all those things. As soon as you're good with the design, you can select elements to reveal the code, and you can take that code in, say, VS Code or any choice of your editor, and add the business logic on top of these UI components, and boom, you have the app running in the simulator. There's a React Native app that's using Expo, and it's fully functional from design to a real app. Yeah. So let's look at like how I built it. So this is the tool. It has two parts. It has designer on the left and the code export on the right. Let's have a closer look at the designer. Like if you want to build one, where do you think we start? So I think all these tools start at say drawing something on the canvas. You let user pick a tool and then draw something on the canvas. Here, this example has a rectangle on the screen. So how do we build this? I think there are three parts of it. First, you need to track the mouse position, and then have an agreement between the event dispatch and the renderer, like data model. How do we store, say, the data of a rectangle? So maybe X, Y, width, height. And then the renderer. How do we render that with a renderer? Say, if you want to draw a rectangle on the screen. Let's see how we do it. So the first part is mouse tracking. We can use, say, on mouse move on a div to track the position of the div. And then we have the event object in the callback function that gets client X, client Y, and a lot of information about the pointer. It also carries information about the current button, the mouse button which is clicked. Next comes the data model. Here I've used an interface with X, Y, width, height. I call it rectangle type. And yeah, this can be an agreement between the dispatch and the renderer. So let's look at the renderer. So this is a React component, and it's called rectangle that takes in this prop type of XY width height, and it's using a div, an absolutely positioned div, with top left as Y and X, and then width height directly maps to the CSS property, and that's how you achieve a simple renderer. And that's the final output. Once you stitch these three things together, you start getting the desired canvas drawing sort of thing. If you are interested in the code, you can have a look at this code sandbox link. Uh, and yeah, there's a bit more which is happening behind the scene. All right, so but that's not uh, a complete design tool. You need few more things like input sources. They can be more than just the mouse movement or interaction, like keyboard shortcuts. We can have a property panel on the right side which maps to the user interface. Then we can have multiple users using the same browser, and we need to reload the project from JSON. Renderers, we can have shapes, form controls, we can have layouts, scroll view, we can have text and input text, list view, image, and a bunch of other things. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we need to save, reopen, undo, redo, share the session, and do a bunch of these operations. So let's try to expand our example to actually build this design tool. So the first obvious step, what anyone would do is to move out the data store in a separate, say, functional, like a store, right? And that's what we did. We create a store connected to the UI. That's a view, that's a React component, and then dispatch actions from the view whenever the user interacts with the UI. Pretty standard React stuff. And this is how it looks like. We have the layers stored in key value pairs with, say, layer ID as the key, and the position and orientation as the value of that layer. The store is connected to all the components marked on the right side. So uh, so all the red blocks, what you see on the right side, those are the components which is connected to the store. And any interaction on the UI would dispatch an action that changes data in the store via reducer. So yeah, uh, this worked well, and we achieved the basic functionality of our app. And like any other app, we had faced challenges. And as we resolved each challenge, we also evolved the architecture. The first one was performance issue. We hit performance issues like the users could notice the sluggish behavior when drawing, say, elements on the screen or dragging them. It was more or less related to the number of elements present on the canvas. And yeah, we were using DOM renderers. So to achieve butter smooth functioning, it's recommended to keep the frame rate around 60 FPS or above that. That meant we had to process everything from calculation to rendering in 16 ms. Google Developers Blog has some great articles about rendering performance and the pixel pipeline. So we started digging in, and the Chrome DevTools, the Profiler tab, uh, shared, like there was a lot of information about like what was going inside our app, and we tried to dig into uh, this specific event of mouse move. And we realized that with so many connected components in a specific case, we every mouse move frame was taking about 90 ms. That was for a specific example, and 90 ms is like a bit or quite beyond 16 ms target. So we had to reduce it further. And we did that with recommended performance tuning techniques like selection and memoization. Selection selects a part of the global state, whereas memoization caches the output of functions with the same input. So it speeds up things, and we achieved some better performance with this. But we were looking for more. We started exploring and looking at other design patterns and their underlying philosophies, use cases, trade-offs, and the whys. Like, why is declarative so beautiful and easy to use? What decisions are made for us when we use a declarative pattern or say functional programming? And why DOM is imperative? And why DOM uses mutation and not declarative approach? So uh, we came across this tweet days after we implemented things, and Kent sums it really well. To quote, he says that Redux subscribes you to the entire store, whereas on the other side, Mobix, uh, you subscribe to the things that you are actually using. It's not really a choice made by these library, but its underlying philosophies of functional or and non-functional behavior or immutability versus mutability. And the bottom line is that we have two types of state management. One is pull, another is push. What we were using was a pull strategy in which all the mounted components check for a change after an update. Uh, Whereas in push, it flips the game. It keeps a track of listeners and updates only those components which are actually listening to some particular, say, data model. And Swix recently summarized the pros and cons when moving from imperative to declarative. It's more of what React does, like from if you move from imperative to declarative. So pros are more concise, implementation agnostic, order independent, therefore optimizable, parallelizable. But on the other hand, the cons are we lose on performance, efficiency, debuggability, and extensibility. So we started looking at like, are there options to move to imperative or move parts of our application to imperative API? So imperative for performance, extensibility, and control. And this worked only for us. I wouldn't say that this is the best way to go forward, but it worked for our particular use case. So we embraced imperative with object-oriented paradigm. And we also looked into the code of VS Code and other design tools and realized that a lot of other people were also doing something similar. Uh, so the architecture evolved to something how we use React with Mobux. Uh, and that changed the entire application and the core. So the store changed from a flat normalized structure to a nested tree. And we had to make obvious changes like moving to imperative pattern. When you move to imperative, you have to adopt mutation. You can have deeply nested trees just like DOM, and dealing with the overhead of references and other trade-offs of mutability and object-oriented paradigm. Let's look at the store. So the global object was called as session in our project, and that had a domain property. Again, this was an instance of the domain class, and then we had layers inside that. So session.domain.layers. And nested layers were available in the children property of layer. In the previous example, the flatter structure, we had IDs, but it was in a flatter structure. But here we could actually nest things up. So say it was session.domain.say layers dot children of 0 and then dot x. So it was something like this. So let me show you a real example. That's an actual log of the session object. There are too many things happening here. So let me just highlight the domain part. So that's the domain object which hosts the layer. Once we open up the layer, so this entire thing is the layer object. That's an instance of layer. And then Yeah, so each layer has a property called props, and inside that we have a property called a style, which has top, left, width, height properties. So the API is similar, or this tree structure or style props is very similar to how React Native API works. But there was a problem. React works with immutable data, and it doesn't re-render on mutation. So we had to implement custom event emitter and handlers for re-renders on data change. For example, each data model was extended from a base class model, and it had a map of event listeners. On the key, we had the name of the event, and on the value, we had an array of the listeners, what was there. For example, if we had to change the width of layer, so we were directly mutating layer.width is equal to something, and then layer.emit updated. And on the React side, we had the listeners to force update the component on these events. So if if React receives say, an updated event, so it has to force update the thing. So with all these changes, we took a little. I mean, it became a little complex, but we achieved it. And the handler started taking a little less time. From we moved from about 90 ms to 50 ms for our use case. But Chrome was still complaining. If you notice, it says handler took about 50 ms, and that's a lot of time for one frame to process. So we batched the updates. We noticed that we were force updating the same component multiple times in a single render cycle. We batched them and reduced the renders. Quite an improvement. We were around 18 ms, and yes, that was very close to 16 ms. But we were asking for more. We had a look at the profiler and the React re-render timeline. So React adds a lot of information in the profiler tab. If you see the function calls and the timeline, you in the timing tab, it shows like which components were re-render and which were like expensive re-renders. So during mouse move, we realized that we might not need React virtual DOM diffing and things like that just for that part. I mean, we were using React DOM diffing and everything, which was working really great for us. But for mouse move, we directly updated the DOM, uh, and only in this particular case. Let me show you an example. So once you we resize a rectangle, we are updating the position, the width and height of the rectangle, and the position editor also updates like the input of width and height. That's the position editor. So this is how it looks like. So to render this, we had a component to render that particular say x76. It's an input box, so input group input, and we were storing the ref, the DOM ref of that left input node in a local variable of that component. And when resizer resize things, it emits an update, and the component listens to that emit. And instead of force update, this time it directly updates that DOM ref value and skips uh, the React render cycle altogether. This is not a recommended approach, but these are the little hacks what we added to gain performance. And yes, we were at 9.86 ms. That's what we were looking for, way under 16 ms. And the performance boosted really well. So yeah, very happy to see this. Let me revisit and quick summary of like how performance changed. So we moved from pull to push state management using imperative API, and then we batched updates which got us a good performance from 50 ms to 18 ms per frame. And in some cases, we directly updated the DOM. That also reduced the frame time to 9 ms. But there were more problems. This was just a part of it. When we moved from functional to object-oriented paradigm or imperative or direct mutation, undo redo became really tough. Like undo redo is pretty straightforward with immutable data. You can keep a stack of the state and switch back and forth. With mutable data, it's a different story. The same object is updated. So to implement undo and redo, one needs to keep a track of mutation. And how did we do it? we can achieve undo redo with command pattern. It's similar to Flux architecture, but for mutable data. So the way we have actions in Flux architecture, we have commands. Each command carries functions like execute, undo, redo. And the execute and undo redo, these methods have the exact mutations. So if you call execute and call undo, it goes back to the same state. It undoes the mutations what were made in execute. And these commands are fed into a command manager that keeps a track of that keeps a stack of undo and redo. And yeah, when we call undo on command manager, it executes the undo on that particular command and then takes it off the undo stack and puts it on redo stack, and vice versa. So the overall architecture looks something like this, like React for UI and a session object that hosts a command manager and some data models. So whenever there's a change or some any user interaction on the React side, it dispatches a command to command manager that executes it, keeps the command on the stack, and then during execution, it updates some data models, and those data models emits and re-renders React. Let's see some examples. How does layer selection work? Once the user clicks on the layer, how does it work altogether? So React dispatches a command, select layers on mouse click to the command manager. And then the command is executed and also stacked. It updates the state of layer under the mouse to selected and emits the change events back to React. And React then receives these events and force updates the components, only those components that needs to be updated. Another example, how do we change the background color of rectangles? So React dispatches a command, set style attribute to command manager, and then again the command is stacked and executed. In the execute method, we have methods like set key value. That key is background color, and the value is some particular value. And yeah, once this is done, we have an emit method that goes back to React, and the components that is listening to this particular event also re-renders. All right, so we have achieved something here, but there's a bit more what we can do. There could be expensive operations in the application, so we can move those expensive operations to a worker thread. So we add another worker thread on the right side, and things like, say, code generation from the tool executes on a non-blocking worker thread. And this gives a very nice, smooth behavior for the UI thread. Let's have a closer look at like code conversion, what actually happens there. So on a very high level, code generation is a function that receives the session object and returns a string. The mapping looks like this for, say, React export, but you can see like inline styles and absolute positioning. Who likes that? So we implemented an algo that converts these absolutely positioned elements to flex with margin and padding. And we also moved out the inline style to components using style component, CSS and JS. That's a different story, but yeah, that's what we did. And it started looking really nice, much cleaner, like component, container component, and that's being used inside, say, a particular component. So yeah, so that's the high level overview of like how we achieved a lot of things in BuilderX. There's definitely more. This code conversion can be a separate talk. But yeah, that's the high level overview. So what are the takeaways? What's the crux of the talk? So I want to say that every decision brings a trade-off, be it anything, any decision, any architectural decision in your app. It brings in a lot of advantages, but on the other side, it also brings in trade-offs. So I would say choose what works for you, and don't stick to something very strongly. Stay humble and kind. Every tech choice has its own place. No one tech is better than the other. So I would say don't make it your religion. And yeah, get down to the metal when needed. And yeah, that's all. Thank you so much. And you can follow me on Twitter, Sanket Sahu. Thank you so much. I hope to speak again at React Europe. Bye.
You also talked about on the React Europe website for your talk. It talked about a paper that starts with the basics of understanding the design tool that you guys are building and how you could build it yourself. Is there a link to that as well?
I don't have a link to that, but I think I'm going to write about it. Once that is done, then I can share that.
Okay.
Yeah, I just shared the code sandbox link in the Zoom chat. You can probably paste it there.
Perfect. So let me go ahead and paste that over here. Um, I guess what is your team's biggest takeaway from embracing the imperative pattern?
Um, the biggest takeaway is don't just stick to something which is like widely accepted. It worked for like 99% of the people. It might not work for you because you might be solving a different problem altogether. Like not everybody builds a design tool, and React isn't used mostly for that. React is usually used to build, say, like web apps, dashboards, and things like that. So when you're building something different, there might be a different approach. So keep looking for different types of architectures and underlying philosophies, I would say.
Do you have a favorite book on design patterns?
Yeah, I'm right now reading this book called Clean Architecture, which is really nice. Talks about
Great.
different patterns. Yeah.
Yep. And of course, like the Gang of Four design patterns. All right. Cool.